Well, today's Washington Post reports that Eric Woolson, a longtime Iowa politico who recently served as the media coordinator for Senator Grassley's reelection campaign, also was the campaign manager for Bob Vander Plaat's gubernatorial campaign in 2010, but really rose to fame as Mike Huckabee's campaign manager during his victorious 2008 Iowa caucus campaign. And that's where today's story from the Washington Post about him joining Tim Pawlenty's team becomes interesting. Tim Pawlenty, the former governor of the state of Minnesota that is running for president, has all but announced he's putting a team together in Iowa as we speak, and his recent addition of Woolson has a lot of people in the political class assuming that means that Mike Huckabee will not run. Now, this is noteworthy for a few different reasons. Number one, the Republican Party has a tradition of nominating the next old white guy in line, and while the mainstream media keeps assuming that's Mitt Romney, the reality is that it was Mike Huckabee who finished second to John McCain in 2008. Willard dropped out several weeks before Mike Huckabee did, and it was Huckabee who surged ahead of Willard on Super Tuesday in the last election cycle. So this is really his turn, if indeed you believe in that traditional Republican next old white guy in line presidential nomination theory. That would have seemed to favor Mike Huckabee. In addition, there's been a slew of public opinion polls in the last several months that have said that Mike Huckabee is leading the Republican presidential field. Now, you can't really put a lot of stock into those because at this time during the 2008 election cycle, all of these polls had Rudy Giuliani being the next president of the United States as well. But these polls do measure one thing, and that is name ID. And when you look at the perch that Mike Huckabee's had at his disposal, both via Fox News and then, of course, taking over the late Paul Harvey on ABC radio networks, that gives him a lot of exposure and an excellent opportunity to raise his name ID and to introduce himself to millions and millions of Americans each day. So if he's not going to run and take advantage of those things, that leaves a huge void. Now, do I think he's going to run? I've gone back and forth on this, but for the most part, I have not believed he is going to run for president again. A lot of you watching this know that I was certainly a Huckabee supporter in 2008, although I have not declared who I'm going to support here in 2012, and I'm going to probably hold out that support for as long as I possibly can. Mike Huckabee certainly would have been under consideration for me as a voter, but not the same Mike Huckabee that ran in 2008. For me as a voter, I think my viewpoints have evolved since then. I think my worldview, at least I hope it has anyway, has matured since then. I also think that what we are facing as a nation requires a different Mike Huckabee this go around than the one that we saw in 2008 as well. And maybe that's why Mike's not going to run. Being President of the United States, I think, is one of those gigs that probably sounds a lot better than it really is. And the kind of person who really enjoys that job might be the kind of person you really don't want as President of the United States. And when you look at other signs, Mike has done nothing whatsoever to put any sort of a ground team together that it would take to win the Iowa caucuses. There's been talk that maybe he's running again, but he still is considerably heavier weight-wise than he was in the last campaign. And I've always thought when the guy starts losing a considerable amount of weight, then I'll believe that he's running for president. He's yet to do that. I think instead, Mike has smartly determined that it would be best for book sales to allow this speculation to grow while he's out there on another tour of yet another best-selling book. I think this is the third one he's written now since he left the presidential campaign in 2008. And of course, if you're going to nix the idea that you're going to run for president, that's going to severely limit publicity and media coverage of your book tour. So it's probably best not to do that until after the media blitz with the book is done. Now, even if Mike Huckabee doesn't announce, I still can foresee a scenario where later on he could get in. It was interesting recently, two people that ranked highly in his 2008 Iowa caucus campaign, Bob Vander Plaat and Wes Enos, each disagreed publicly about when Huckabee should get in the race. Bob Vander Plaat suggested that he could wait until after the straw poll. Wes Enos thought he needed to get in right away. And I tend to side with Wes on this issue. But I would say there's one scenario where I could see a clamoring effect for Mike Huckabee after the straw poll is over. And that is if there really isn't anyone from that group of people that are trying to coalesce the conservative grassroots, the Tim Pawlenty's, the Michelle Bachmans, the Herman Cains, or the Rick Santorums, if nobody in that group is able to coalesce enough of a coalition to challenge Newt Gingrich or the party establishment's chosen champion for president, then I could foresee a scenario where sometime after Labor Day, particularly here in Iowa, where Mike Huckabee still has a very strong pastoral network across the state, where people could create sort of a draft Huckabee, a clamoring for him to return to the campaign trail. But I think that's the only scenario by which Mike could bypass the straw poll and still be a viable candidate for president. He's probably the only one that could do that in Iowa because of how popular he still is with many people here in this state. But as of now, I don't believe Mike Huckabee is going to run, and I don't know that we're going to see too many other people get in the race other than the names that have already been speculated. And the names that could get in the race, say someone like a Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, I don't believe would be big factors here in Iowa anyway. So Mike Huckabee's departure leaves a huge void, and the story now becomes who's going to fill it. I'm Steve Deace for SteveDeace.com.